In early April 2011, for the first time in years, the shutters of house number 55 on Boulevard Robert Schumann remained closed. This house, located in a residential neighborhood of Nantes, France, belonged to the Dupont de Ligonnès family. The family comprised Xavier, Agnès, and their 4 teenage children. The unusual silence around the usually lively home caught the neighbors' attention. Typically filled with the sounds of the children and their 2 dogs, the sudden quiet was alarming. Known for keeping their shutters open even when on vacation, the closed shutters prompted the neighbors to alert the local police, fearing something might have happened. During an initial inspection, the officers found no trace of the family. However, it was on the 5th inspection that they made a horrific discovery. Located in the western suburbs of Paris, Versailles is the birthplace of Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès, born on March 9, 1961. He was the eldest son of the French Count Bernard Hubert Dupont de Ligonnès and his wife Geneviève Thérèse Maître. In 1966, the family welcomed a daughter named Christine. When Bernard left his wife for a lover, Xavier assumed a leadership role within his family, taking care of his mother and sister Christine. Geneviève claimed to receive divine messages, which she recorded during automatic writing sessions, similar to a surrealist poet. Her peculiar beliefs evolved into sermons about an impending apocalypse, leading her to establish a cult named the Church of Philadelphia. The group included members of the aristocracy, whom Geneviève convinced were chosen to survive the apocalypse and partake in the world's renewal. Christine was designated by her mother to bear the Savior. According to Geneviève, the child would be a reincarnation of both Jesus and Satan, destined to bring salvation. Despite inheriting his father's noble title, Xavier showed little interest in French traditions, instead being fascinated by luxury, high-end cars, and eccentricities. He also admired the United States greatly. Geneviève funded Xavier's lavish lifestyle through significant contributions from cult members who were sworn to secrecy about their activities. In 1974, on the paradisiacal island of Bréhat, Xavier met Emmanuel Teneur. The 2 boys formed a deep bond of mutual understanding, which lasted throughout their lives. It is said that Emmanuel even confessed his love for Xavier at that time, but despite the rejection, their close friendship remained intact. 2 years later, Xavier met Agnès Hodange. The girl was born on November 9, 1962, in Neuilly-sur-Seine, just outside Paris. She stood out for her deep religious devotion. She worked as an assistant at the Blanche de Castille Catholic School in Nantes, where her responsibilities included teaching catechism. Although little is known about her family background, it is well documented that Xavier and Agnès developed a close relationship, leading to a passionate but brief romance before they went their separate ways. In 1990, Agnès gave birth to her first child, Arthur, from a casual relationship. Soon after, she and Xavier reunited, rekindled their love, and decided to marry. Xavier adopted Arthur as his own son. 2 years later, they welcomed their first son together, Thomas, the heir to the family name. To commemorate the occasion, Xavier chose Emmanuel as Thomas's godfather. Following Thomas, the couple had 2 more children, Anne and Benoit. The family of 6 seemed to embody the ideal family, with Xavier appearing as a loving father and the children excelling academically, suggesting a promising future. Agnes was dedicated to instilling her faith in her children, frequently taking them to Mass. Other parishioners saw her as kind but firm with her children. Around the year 2000, in line with their interests and preferences, Xavier moved his family to the United States. Xavier, a discreet, charismatic, and multilingual man, believed he could blend in seamlessly in the United States. However, this venture failed, leading to significant financial losses. Upon returning to France, he began accumulating substantial debts related to his professional activities, which were always somewhat ambiguous. Various investigations have described him as a salesman. According to French media reports, money troubles had been a significant concern for Xavier for several years. One of his failed ventures included an unusual scheme to import cars from the United States to France. He also started several small businesses, all of which saw limited success. These included a hotel and restaurant guide for sales representatives, a customer loyalty system for restaurants, an association called the French Federation of Commerce, and a discreet business where he was listed as the manager. The accounts for this last enterprise were minimal, and in 2003, he hired 6 salespeople. Xavier's work often took him away from home from Monday to Friday and brought in a meager income, around $4,200 annually in declared earnings. Gradually, financial issues began to strain his marriage, likely exacerbated by typical marital disagreements. In 2004, Agnes wrote extensively on a French forum, detailing the challenges she and her husband faced. Notably, she mentioned that he had once told her that a group death as a family wouldn't be catastrophic. By 2009, the increasing debts severely impacted their relationship, leading to a temporary separation. During this period, Xavier sent numerous letters blaming Agnes for the family's troubles and holding her responsible for their financial ruin. This emotional turmoil took a toll on Agnes, causing her to lose her appetite and struggle with insomnia. On numerous occasions, Xavier turned to his friend Emmanuel for assistance. Emmanuel, hailing from a wealthy family, had inherited a substantial fortune from his father. Despite his wealth, Emmanuel lived modestly in a small apartment. An enigmatic and somewhat eccentric individual, he never hesitated to lend Xavier significant sums of money. In addition to financial support, Emmanuel funded Xavier's travels and even co-signed for the house where Xavier eventually settled with his family in the late 2000s. Thanks to Emmanuel's generosity, the family resided in a chalet located in the suburbs at 55 Boulevard Robert Schumann, west of Nantes. Once settled, the neighbors quickly formed the impression that Agnes was bossy and less pleasant than her husband. Behind closed doors, Agnes faced a personal hell. She viewed Xavier as both too fragile and paradoxically too rigid, almost militaristic. An old-fashioned man, he played the head of the household but was emotionally distant, lacking tenderness and affection, and sometimes even abusive. Furthermore, Agnes confided in her friends from the Thursday prayer group about her fears of how Geneviève controlled Xavier. She described her mother-in-law as a mentally ill mystic and was deeply afraid. On January 20th, 2011, Bernard passed away. Given the disparity between his lifestyle and financial difficulties, Xavier hoped his father's death would result in an inheritance. However, he was in for a shock. Upon delving into his father's estate, he found nothing substantial. All that remained were a few papers, a rifle, a card, a ring, and some cash, which Xavier promptly took. Within hours of Bernard's death, Xavier withdrew cash using his father's card. On February 2nd, he acquired a firearms license, and by March 12th, he had purchased a silencer for the rifle. During this period, he also bought quicklime. He practiced shooting the rifle in his garden, aiming at a balloon on a stand. Emmanuel, who was visiting, tried the rifle and saw nothing suspicious. Xavier explained that the silencer was to avoid disturbing the neighbors. On Friday, April 1st, the two friends went to a shooting range together, where Bernard's inherited rifle was a focal point of interest. The following day, Emmanuel called Xavier 5 times and they spoke for nearly an hour. Investigation suggests that the horror began on Sunday, April 3rd. That night, Xavier, Agnes, and their children went to the movies and later enjoyed a pleasant evening dining at a restaurant. Everyone was present except for Thomas, who was studying at a Catholic university and lived in a nearby student hostel. After their night out, the family returned to their chalet where neighbors saw them and some family members even exchanged text messages with friends and acquaintances. Xavier messaged Christine, telling her about their dinner outing. The most accepted theory is that Xavier drugged his wife and children, waited until they were asleep, then shot them and buried them in the garden. He also did the same to the family's 2 Labrador dogs. Xavier's alibi was as macabre as his actions. On Monday morning, he began contacting people related to his family circle from as early as 6 a.m. He called Agnes's workplace to say she was sick and contacted the children's schools, claiming Arthur, Agnes's son from a previous relationship, had a motorcycle accident and that Anne and Benoit were ill. By midday, he sent a letter to the restaurant where Arthur worked, saying Arthur was resigning because his father had been transferred to Australia. He still had Thomas to deal with. On that same Monday, April 4th, Xavier contacted Thomas and had dinner with him at a restaurant near his university residence. After the meal, a tired Thomas returned to his room. The following day, Thomas received an urgent message from his father, claiming that Agnes had a bicycle accident and was in a mild coma at a hospital, prompting Thomas to travel immediately to Nantes. It is presumed that Xavier killed Thomas in the same manner as his siblings and mother. Later that evening, Emmanuel spoke with Xavier again, and this time they talked for just under 19 minutes. At midnight, a friend of Thomas received a message from him, stating he was home watching a movie with his father. Thomas was likely already dead by then. About an hour later, Xavier sent an email to Emmanuel, arranging to meet soon. Emmanuel replied, reminding Xavier that he had power of attorney and that the key was on the sailboat. Contrary to what one might expect, Xavier did not act discreetly. He went in and out of his house, even leaving a note on the door asking not to deliver any more mail. Instead of hiding, he withdrew cash from ATMs and his image was captured by security cameras. He paid with his credit cards at restaurants and stayed in hotels under his real name. As Xavier's perfect escape began, neighbors gradually noticed troubling signs. The once open windows of the chalet had been closed for days. The local children no longer saw the family's 4 children. The dogs barking had ceased, and Agnes hadn't returned to work. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. Piecing together the clues, the concerned neighbors contacted the authorities. Upon arrival, officers found a nearly empty refrigerator with only a few jars of preserves. They discovered a still damp mop in the kitchen, a chess set on the living room table, and guitars on a sofa. It seemed the Dupont de Ligonnès family had vanished. The scene was eerie. Beds were stripped of sheets, picture frames were empty, and closets had missing clothes. In the midst of the mystery, on April 9th, a letter surfaced, sent to family and friends. It claimed that Xavier had been hired by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration and that the family had to leave undercover as part of a witness protection program, explaining their sudden disappearance and lack of communication. Suspicion and worry grew among neighbors who felt there was something off about this story. Fearing for the family's lives, they urged authorities to investigate further. Meanwhile, Xavier embarked on a journey through southern France in his car. As the case gained media attention, more details from the past emerged. On April 15th, security cameras captured Xavier entering a small hotel near Cannes. He parked his car, took a bag, and disappeared into the nearby woods. This was the last confirmed sighting of him. Curiously, on that same day, Emmanuel called his mother, revealing long-held secrets. He was homosexual, alcoholic, and depressed. Responding to the neighbors' pleas and lack of leads, authorities revisited the family home. On April 21, 2011, a freshly disturbed patch of earth under a terrace caught an officer's attention. They soon uncovered a concrete slab and moments later made a grim discovery. The bodies of Agnes and her 4 children were found, wrapped in bags, each with 2 to 3 gunshot wounds and covered in religious symbols. They had been meticulously buried in burlap sacks with quicklime. The family's 2 Labradors were also found buried. Despite the thorough search, no traces of blood, fingerprints, or DNA were found. Xavier became the most wanted man in France, accused of the massacre. His face dominated the news, earning him titles such as the Most Wanted Man, the Nantes Killer, and the Face of Horror. Yet, it seemed he had mysteriously vanished from the face of the earth. The autopsy results of the 5 bodies revealed to authorities that they were dealing with a meticulously planned execution. Most of the bullets had been fired into the victims' heads. Additionally, traces of a sedative were found in the children, confirming the hypothesis that they were attacked while sleeping. A startling detail emerged regarding Agnes. In the master bedroom, investigators found a device she used to manage her sleep apnea, which had stopped functioning at precisely 3:27 a.m. on April 4th. Investigators speculated that Xavier might have hesitated to kill Thomas, as he was the heir to the family name. Due to the close bond between Xavier and Emmanuel, the latter was summoned by the authorities. Emmanuel appeared cooperative during these initial inquiries, expressing his belief that Xavier's disappearance was a sort of pilgrimage before committing suicide. When questioned about the rifle, Emmanuel initially denied knowledge of it. However, deeper investigation into his life revealed inconsistencies, and authorities soon realized that he was not entirely who he claimed to be. A significant development occurred 24 hours later. Just before noon, Nantes police searched Emmanuel's apartment. They confiscated his laptop, and Emmanuel then disclosed what he truly knew about Xavier's rifle. A subsequent examination of the hard drive uncovered extensive correspondence between Emmanuel and Xavier. These exchanges range from mundane to philosophical, with some emails adding a peculiar tone to their relationship. One email, sent in the early hours of April 6th, particularly caught the police's attention. These accumulated details led investigators to suspect that Emmanuel might have assisted in Xavier's escape. But Emmanuel was not the only suspect. Christine also drew the investigators' scrutiny. During their interviews, Christine and Geneviève were evasive, painting a superficial picture of Xavier and denying any knowledge of the Church of Philadelphia. Geneviève spoke about Xavier's childhood, but avoided uncomfortable topics such as the source of their income, and she outright denied the existence of the sect. However, The diligence of the investigative team paid off. They discovered a copy of a complaint filed years earlier by former sect members who had fled in fear after Christine proposed to have sex with all the men to conceive the chosen one. This revelation about the sect, which included wealthy members providing financial support, was crucial. Investigators believed this environment might have offered Xavier logistical and material assistance. As a result, all former members of the Church of Philadelphia were interrogated, and the police monitored the sect's followers, hoping to catch any slip-ups in conversation or email. Despite these efforts, no definitive leads emerged. Meanwhile, Xavier's cell phone records allowed authorities to trace his movements within the country. The last concrete trace of Xavier was a security recording from April 15th. Investigators speculated that he was carrying the weapon in his bag based on its shape. While everything suggested he might have committed suicide in the woods, the detectives were puzzled as exhaustive searches in the dense forest yielded no body or remains. This led to the theory that Xavier might have been picked up by a boat and taken to another country. Consequently, an international arrest warrant was issued. On May 4th, Nantes police contacted the National Center for Fisheries Monitoring to verify if Emmanuel or Xavier owned a motorboat or sailboat. They found nothing, although they knew the records might not be fully up to date. On May 9th, Emmanuel was summoned to the Nantes police station for another interview, which was, in fact, an interrogation. The police were now focused on finding a boat and identifying its captain. At this point, Emmanuel was unaware of the depth of the investigation or the suspicion surrounding him. When questioned about a reference to a sailboat, Emmanuel explained it as a coincidence. He revealed that he had given Xavier power of attorney to access his safe deposit box. Should anything happen to Emmanuel, the key was stored on a model sailboat in an apartment. The safe contained his will, and that was all. The police let Emmanuel go, feeling frustrated and empty-handed. Despite the coincidences, the investigation remained uncertain. At this stage, Emmanuel was seen merely as a witness. No arrests had been made, and the police debated the point of further interrogating him, though they decided to apply some pressure as he remained the most credible accomplice. A significant detail emerged when investigators reviewed all checks issued to Xavier's company. They found an unusual check for $4,200 signed by Emmanuel. The address on the check indicated a previously unknown account in Monaco. An immediate request for the account statements was sent, but Monaco's strict banking privacy laws meant the authorities there would only respond to their own regulatory agencies. On September 28th, 4 police officers visited Emmanuel's residence again. After long minutes, Emmanuel emerged, disoriented and in his underwear, barely able to confirm his identity. The sparse interior of his apartment was littered with empty alcohol bottles, reflecting a state of deep loneliness. Emmanuel had not received any letters or phone calls from his friend, and that was what tormented him. The police no longer saw him as a suspect but as a castaway, leading them to question if they were following the wrong lead. Xavier had become one of France's most wanted alleged murderers, possibly even globally. In 2015, a journalist claimed to have received a letter from Xavier stating he was alive. Handwriting, DNA, and fingerprint analyses were conducted, but the note did not yield any new information. On January 9, 2018, police raided a monastery in Roquebrune-sur-Argent after a tip-off about a monk resembling Xavier. After 2 hours of intense searching, they determined it was a case of mistaken identity. On January 18, 2019, Emmanuel died of a heart attack. That same year, authorities arrested a man they believed to be Xavier at Glasgow Airport in Scotland. Once again, it was a case of mistaken identity. Another theory suggested Xavier might be in South America, specifically Argentina, where his language skills and charisma could help him blend in. Years have passed, and the Church of Philadelphia has not only persisted, but has reportedly experienced a resurgence. This small, highly secretive group includes members who have been part of it for nearly 40 years, living as if withdrawn from the world. In the summer of 2019, two brothers raised within the sect filed new complaints against Christine and Genevieve. For 2 decades, these women have fervently preached that Xavier is alive, innocent, and hiding in the United States as part of a witness protection program. They claim everything written in the April 9th letter is pure fabrication. This might sound like denial, but it could also be a way to obscure certain truths. Since 2011, the case has been mired in speculation and false leads, sending authorities down endless labyrinths. The pressing question remains: will justice ever be served for Agnes and her children? Despite the bleak outlook, some believe that the truth will eventually come to light. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Tullahoma, Tennessee, might not be the first place you'd think of when you hear about a murder. Yet, in the early morning hours of July 2, 2012, a shocking scene unfolded. Around 1:30 a.m., investigators stumbled upon a fire on the side of a secluded road. What they initially thought was a simple blaze turned out to be something far more horrifying: the burning body of a young woman. As soon as the fire was put out, the clues started to add up. They found a woman with star tattoos behind her ears, wearing what remained of a nursing school shirt. She appeared to be in her 20s and was found without clothes from the waist down. The fire had intensely burned her pelvic area, hinting at a sinister act of violence. Megan Sharpton was born on October 24, 1987, in the small American city of Tullahoma, in the state of Tennessee. She grew up in a large and friendly family with 2 sisters and a brother, with whom she got along very well. Her parents strove to give maximum attention to all their children, but Megan was especially close to her mother. From an early age, she helped her parents care for her younger siblings and was always eager to assist friends and family. During high school, Megan decided she wanted to become a nurse, which led her to enroll at Motlow Community College, located about 7 miles from her home. She also worked as a waitress at a local restaurant and eventually moved in with her boyfriend. In the summer of 2012, at the age of 24 and just a few months shy of finishing college, Megan planned to immediately find a job as a nurse. Shortly before her disappearance, she had also started working at a nursing home to gain practical skills in caring for the elderly. Despite her busy life, Megan tried to see her family whenever she could. On July 1st, her sister, who lived in another city, came home, and Megan promised to meet with her. However, that evening, Megan called her mother to say she would be delayed. She had been offered an interesting job opportunity and had arranged an interview for that night. She was excited about this opportunity and promised her mother that she would visit her as soon as the interview was over. According to her, the job involved taking care of an elderly woman. As time passed, there was no word from Megan. She did not respond to messages or calls. Her parents began to worry. They contacted her boyfriend, but he also did not know where Megan was and was unaware of any interview. Despite this, the parents decided not to panic and waited for their daughter to get in touch. At 24, with her schedule packed between her studies and 2 jobs, it was possible she was just busy, but Megan did not show up the next day. Meanwhile, in a remote area several kilometers from the city, around 1:30 a.m., a group of teenagers saw a fire in a field. Given the very hot summer, they thought wildfires might have spread to the grass. They immediately called the firefighters, who arrived at the scene to find an unexpected turn of events. Shortly after beginning to extinguish the flames, they discovered a body at the center of the fire. Once the fire was fully extinguished and the police arrived, they realized they were looking at a dead girl. It was clear that a murder had taken place. However, detectives could not establish the victim's identity immediately, as she had no documents, wallet, or phone with her. Due to the effects of the fire, the features were unrecognizable. The only clues available to detectives were 2 small star-shaped tattoos. The investigation at the crime scene led to the conclusion that the girl was dead before the fire started. The victim suffered a serious head injury that appeared to be fatal. Yet, no clues pointing to the presence of the killer were found. The victim was partially dressed, and from her shirt, the police deduced that the girl might have been a nurse. They also found that there were no missing person reports matching her description, which complicated the identification process. However, news quickly spread throughout the small town. Megan's mother saw a social media post about a young woman found dead in a field with 2 star-shaped tattoos and realized with horror that it was her daughter. Medical examiners eventually confirmed that the deceased was indeed Megan Sharpton. They determined that the cause of death was a bullet wound to the back of the head, supporting the police's theory that she was already dead at the time of the fire. Furthermore, she was killed elsewhere and her body was then moved to the field. She had also been subjected to violence prior to her death, and the experts were able to extract a DNA sample of the criminal. The DNA was immediately checked against the national database, but there were no matches. The detectives began by searching for Megan's car, a red Mustang. She had worked at a restaurant that night and had left in her vehicle. The car was nowhere to be found, indicating that the killer might have taken it somewhere that could yield crucial evidence. While its location remained unknown, the police began to look for potential suspects among Megan's acquaintances. Attention turned to her boyfriend, who became a significant person of interest. Megan's sister immediately expressed her suspicion to the detectives that he was involved in the murder, pointing out that the couple had been having relationship issues. Megan had been with him for 3 years, part of which they spent living together in an apartment they shared with another roommate, but he denied any involvement in the incident. Initially, he claimed that everything was fine between him and Megan, but eventually conceded that their relationship was troubled and heading towards a split. However, he insisted he had no motive for murder and provided an alibi for the time of her death. While the police were verifying his alibi, they decided to search the apartment where Megan and her boyfriend lived. In the bathroom, they found troubling evidence, traces of blood and syringes containing illicit substances. At the same time, 12 miles from the city, police found Megan's abandoned car in a secluded and remote area. There were no documents or phone inside, which meant the perpetrator could have taken or discarded them elsewhere. The police appealed to the public, asking anyone who found such items to contact them immediately. There were no signs of blood or a struggle in the car, but there was an intriguing clue, a note with a non-existent address. Investigators concluded that the unknown assailant had tried to lure Megan to a secluded place to commit the crime. Early in the investigation, they discovered that Megan was preparing for a job interview. However, they had no leads in that direction. One theory was that the person who offered her the job had given her a fake address. When the community learned of the details surrounding the case, a chilling connection was made. 6 months earlier, hundreds of miles from Tullahoma, another young woman of a similar age to Megan had disappeared without a trace. She was also a pharmacy student, which led many to fear that there could be a serial killer in the county. This only heightened the community's anxiety, with concerns that the criminal might strike again. Meanwhile, the police questioned the roommate of Megan and her boyfriend, who admitted to using illicit substances. He claimed that Megan and her boyfriend were unaware of this and that they never partook themselves. Forensic experts analyzed the blood traces found and concluded that they indeed belonged to the roommate. However, the story did not end there. He revealed that Megan and her boyfriend's relationship had in fact ended some time ago, and he himself had recently started a relationship with Megan. He had kept his addiction hidden from her. Knowing this, the police began to suspect both her boyfriend and the roommate. The boyfriend might have harbored resentment towards Megan, and the roommate had a known drug habit, but there was no direct evidence against either of them. During questioning, he claimed he was unaware of the new relationship, and by this time, the police had already verified his alibi. He had been at work at the time of Megan's murder, which excluded him from the list of suspects. As for the roommate, he did not have a solid alibi. However, an analysis of his phone showed that he had been trying to reach Megan throughout the night and had sent her messages trying to find out where she was. Although this was not conclusive proof of his innocence, the police doubted he was the murderer. DNA samples were taken from both men and sent to the lab for analysis, but the results could take months. In the meantime, the detectives found a new lead. In the last interrogation, Megan's boyfriend mentioned he might help the investigation. On the day of Megan's disappearance, an unknown man had called her old phone, which was at home, wanting to speak to her about a job as a caregiver, saying that she had been recommended by someone named Naomi. He mentioned that Megan had spoken several times of a fellow student with that name, but he knew no further details. Police began searching among the students at Motlow College and soon found a student by that name. When detectives obtained her address, Naomi was not at home. Neighbors provided Naomi's phone number to the police. Naomi was surprised by the police call and claimed she barely knew Megan, having only met her in a few classes and never speaking much. Naomi insisted that she had not recommended Megan for any job and that Megan had bothered her, so she certainly wouldn't have helped her. The police were disappointed that this promising lead didn't yield further information, but they still had more substantial evidence to consider. Investigators handed over the phone, which had received the call about the job, and they had the caller's number in their possession. Experts determined that the call was made from a prepaid phone, making it impossible to establish the owner's name. However, the police traced the device back to the store where it was sold, which had a surveillance camera facing the checkout counter. Upon reviewing the footage from the day the phone was purchased, they immediately identified the buyer. From these images, the police inferred that the individual was purchasing the phone for some illicit purpose. Prepaid phones are popular among those involved in criminal activities in the United States because they do not require personal information for activation, and this person, seen taking out his own phone from his pocket at some point, indicated he was buying an additional phone for suspect purposes. There was also a camera pointing at the parking lot in the store. The police saw the buyer exit the building and get into his car, which soon led to establishing his identity. It turned out to be Timothy Gifford, who had an impressive criminal history. However, his activities were limited to minor drug dealings and he had not been implicated in serious offenses. They soon tracked him down and brought him into the station. He said he bought the phone not for himself, but for a 37-year-old acquaintance named Donnie Jones, who was recuperating from surgery and couldn't pick up the phone himself. In exchange for this favor, Donnie gave Timothy some illegal pills. The detectives were familiar with Donnie, who also had an impressive criminal history, but often acted as an informant for the police. Despite this, no connection between Donnie and Megan was found until Timothy revealed something else. Donnie wanted to trade his van for a Mustang and asked for help with the exchange. Timothy found this request odd since Donnie had 2 young children, and the Mustang isn't exactly known as a family car. Nevertheless, he agreed to try to find a buyer. Donnie handed over the van, and Timothy noticed that inside the old vehicle, there were brand new carpets and seat covers. Donnie explained that his wife told him that the chance of selling the car was much higher with a renovated interior, and here is where the police suddenly discovered something that excited them and connected all the parts of the story. Donnie turned out to be the husband of Naomi, the same woman who supposedly recommended Megan for the job. At that point, the detectives realized they were getting closer to a solution. Unfortunately for them, the man's DNA was not in the database because he had not been convicted of violent crimes. They immediately went to Donnie and Naomi's house to talk to them. At first, the man said he did not know Megan, but after a few minutes he mentioned that he had driven her and Naomi to college several times. This seemed odd compared to Naomi's statements a week earlier. At that time, she claimed that she barely knew Megan and that they hardly spoke and did not get along in general. However, during a second conversation, the woman finally admitted that her husband indeed had driven Megan occasionally. However, Donnie firmly insisted on his innocence. According to him, on the night of the murder, he was at home with his children, allowed the police to search his home without a warrant, and voluntarily provided a DNA sample. He also denied having asked Timothy to buy a prepaid phone for him. In the house, the police found no clues and could only wait for the DNA test results, which could also take months. By then, 2 months had passed since the murder. Megan's parents received her nursing diploma posthumously. People hoped the police would capture the heartless monster as soon as possible, someone who could kill again at any moment. Finally, the laboratory results showed a complete match between Donnie's DNA and the sample found on Megan's body. He was immediately taken to the station, but he continued to insist on his innocence. Upon learning about the DNA match, he changed his story and told detectives that he and Megan had a secret relationship that he had hidden from his wife. According to him, that was why he hadn't mentioned it before. The police considered his story to be obviously fabricated, but they had to release him since there was no concrete evidence other than the DNA, and it was impossible to find 100% proof that would refute Donnie's words. Thus, the detectives were almost certain that the man was the killer, but they needed more evidence. Although they couldn't charge him with murder, they managed to detain him. During a search of his car, they found a firearm he was not allowed to possess due to his criminal record. While in custody, the police had time to look for more evidence. They didn't have to worry about Donnie attacking someone else or escaping. Soon, experts determined that Megan was shot with a weapon of the same caliber as Donnie's rifle. The detectives obtained a warrant to track his phone and check his movements on the night of Megan's murder. They compared those data with the movements of a prepaid phone that Donnie supposedly never owned. Here, the police had a significant breakthrough. The prepaid phone was close to Donnie's phone and followed the same route on the night of the crime. The detectives identified several key locations where Megan was supposedly abducted, where she was killed, and the field where her body was found. At all these locations, both phones were in proximity. Donnie's family owned several farms around Tullahoma. According to the investigation, after abducting her, Donnie took Megan to one of them, subjected her to violence, and killed her. The detectives obtained a search warrant and found a significant clue, a partially burnt bandana that turned out to belong to Megan. Her sister had given her that item. This evidence, combined with Megan's clothing and the DNA match, was enough to bring the case to trial. On November 5th, Donnie was charged with murder. At the trial, new details emerged that only strengthened the case against him. Reviewing his phone, experts discovered many interesting things. It turned out that Donnie had attempted several times to contact other women, offering them jobs as caregivers, but all those attempts failed. According to the investigation's version, Donnie found Megan's phone number on his wife's contact list. He contacted her, telling her that Naomi had recommended her as a caregiver. She agreed, and the man gave her a non-existent address, leading her to a remote location. There, he attacked her, took her to a farm, subjected her to violence, and killed her. Then he took her to a field and burned her. The final touch was the complete replacement of the carpets and seat covers of the pickup he used to transport her body. Apparently, the man feared that he could not completely eliminate certain blood traces and that the police would discover them. As for Naomi, the police concluded that she had no connection with the murder and knew nothing about it. That night, she was working, which was confirmed by numerous pieces of evidence. During the trial, Donnie declared his innocence, and everyone braced themselves for a potentially long process. However, when he realized that the prosecution would seek the death penalty, he decided to make a deal with the investigators. He agreed to forego the death sentence in exchange for a confession. As a result, he pleaded guilty to the murder of Megan and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Nevertheless, after some time, he claimed that he had made the deal under pressure and demanded a review of the case. When the judge accepted his request, he quickly reverted to his previous decision to plead guilty, since a new review would again consider the death penalty. During the trial, it was also explained why the criminal, without any doubt, willingly provided detectives with his DNA sample. He apparently hoped that the fire would destroy all traces, so the police would simply have nothing to compare his sample to, but he was mistaken. With all this, investigators concluded that Donnie probably had no connection to the disappearance of another student who vanished 6 months before Megan. More suitable suspects emerged in that case, and Donnie's candidacy was no longer considered. After the announcement of the verdict, Megan's sister stated that the offender would continue preying on young women and could have taken many more lives, but Megan stopped him by becoming his victim. And ultimately, what makes this story even more tragic is that in November 2013, Megan's mother, who had been doing everything possible to help the police catch her daughter's killer, took her own life. She couldn't bear the devastating loss caused by a cold-hearted criminal. Looking at Donnie's background, it is clear that he could have been apprehended much earlier. Among his numerous offenses was the kidnapping of a young woman, but on that occasion he managed to avoid punishment, and the criminal remained at large. Who knows? Perhaps Megan was not his first victim, but the police have yet to confirm this. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon.